It's Berlin briefing time, and today we take a close look at the latest attempt by a key leader of the far-right Alternative for Germany to rewrite historical facts on the Holocaust. We ask whether the AfD can legitimately claim that denials of German responsibility for the Holocaust by one of its own are simply a glitch. And we take a hard look at why this continuous stream of history denial is increasingly failing to draw a public response. With me here is Melanie Amann, a prominent analyst on the AfD. She's the digital editor of Germany's Funke Media Group, and she has her own Amann Unframed podcast. And down the line is Jakob Schergaut, a man described by the German weekly Der Spiegel as Germany's Nazi alarm system, because he systematically tracks distortions of historical facts. But first, let's take a look and a listen, most of all, to what Björn Höcke, the leader of the AfD in the state of Thuringia and a key figure inside the Alternative for Germany, just said.
To this day, I still cannot explain how this could have happened to us. But I would like to point out that it did not happen in the name of Germans. It happened under the conditions of a dictatorship. And a huge secret was made of it. That explains nothing. There were followers, no question about it. But this crime was not committed in the name of the German people.
And the question he was answering to was about the Holocaust. And this was with Weltwoche, a podcast by a Swiss broadcaster and newspaper. And Jakob, I want to throw this to you because can you just analyze for us? You track a lot of what Björn Höcke specifically says, and we'll go more into what kind of figure he is inside the AfD. Is there something qualitatively different about what he said here?
Well, for us, it was not the big news as it was sometimes portrayed in the public media, because we monitor the AfD and the far right since years and years, and denying German guilt of the Holocaust is one of the key topics of memory politics of the far right and the AfD, of course. So this was not really news, especially this attempt to really try to separate the German people from the perpetrator role is not something new. It's a discourse we monitor since the 50s, actually. So that wasn't the big news for us, really.
Maybe you can just list for us how many of such comments you've been tracking on Björn Höcke, this leading figure in Thuringia, who leads the far right wing of the Alternative for Germany.
Well, of course, there's documented speeches he gave since 2017 where he really tries to reframe the German guilt in the Holocaust and the perpetrator role. I think the most known speech is the 2017 speech, which he gave in Dresden, where he talked about this commemoration site in the middle of Berlin as a memorial of shame, right? And we see kind of, or maybe like phrases like that over the years constantly, right? It's a huge topic for him. And also there's like this old articles under his maybe allies, Land of Ladich, we're not very sure, but there's some scientists who say it's probably him, right? Where we can find similar phrases. So I think it's part of his political identity, really.
Now, Björn Höcke is a leading figure because inside the AfD there was a long struggle. Melanie Amann, you monitored and reported on that very closely. In fact, the current co-leader of the Alternative for Germany, she was once in favor of getting rid of Björn Höcke and then lost a power struggle against him. Now she basically has found her arrangement with him. She's not particularly fond of him, but she will never say anything against him because he is so strong inside the party. You're the one who raised the alarm here in the German media. You went very public on this particular statement of Björn Höcke, who in the past has spoken about wanting a turnaround in terms of German commemoration of the Nazi era. So that would mean from collective responsibility to what exactly? And what we just heard there is something you felt needs a much broader debate, but it didn't really happen. So tell us your take on it.
Yes, Michaela, thank you. For me, it was a shocking remark, even for Höcke's standards, that he would simply put out there that none of the Germans are responsible for Nazi atrocities and the Holocaust. And I've heard a lot of statements from him. And as my colleague just pointed out, we know that he has had these talking points for years. And
he can be legally called a fascist and a Nazi because of those statements in the past.
Absolutely. And I would even go as far as calling him a neo-Nazi, because it's, to me, he's one of the few people in the AfD who really rightfully can be labeled as such. And still, I find it disappointing that it's not being picked up on. My impression is that German society has numbed a bit to these comments. We are used to them from the AfD, that's right. There used to be a party leader who called the Holocaust and the Nazi era
birds dropping.
Sorry.
Yeah, just a speck of bird dropping on German
dropping in the glorious 1,000-year-old history of Germany.
Alexander Gauland, one of the co-founders of the AfD.
That's right. And back then there was a huge outcry in Germany, like to diminish Nazi atrocities in that way, still angered and shocked society. But now you have a politician who is like perhaps the next leader of the state of Thuringia after the next election. It's quite possible he might gain an absolute majority. So we're talking about somebody who will be in government. And with this attitude to our history and basically the constant attempts to deny German responsibility for the crimes. I mean, he said in his statement that, of course, there were a few supporters for the crimes, but it was not a few supporters. It was all of Germany. It was not just a dictatorship that was doing anonymously and secretly participating in this or organizing this, but the German society as such was complicit. I mean, people saw their neighbors being deported. People looted the property of their neighbors. People bought the property of their neighbors that were murdered or had to flee in auctions. And maybe many of them turned a blind eye, didn't want to know what was happening. But anyone who really faced reality or was willing to open their eyes should have known that something really bad, unhuman, criminal was happening to these people. And the constant attempts to deny this guilt and to have the right consequences for everyday politics to this day, this is an attempt that I find dangerous for our country.
And of course, what you just described actually is the very concept of the collective responsibility that is consensus in Germany and has been for decades across the political spectrum, of course, with the exception of the extreme right.
Right.
So this I found actually very remarkable. And Jakob, I want to take this to you again because you closely analyze continuous attempts that amount to different narratives on German history as well. So can you unpack that for us? Where exactly on the scale are we here? Is this simply yet another comment before we talk about the specific timing of this? Or do you find that this amounts to a conscious attempt to really shift the narrative now?
Well, when we talk about the Holocaust and the reception of the Holocaust in the far right, we have to differentiate between two phases, right? In Germany especially, because in 1994, there was this law passed which made the denial of the Holocaust actually a crime, right?
And he always stops short of that. I think it's really important to just make clear that he knows exactly where the legal boundaries are.
Yes, of course. We see in the beginning of the 90s that this outright Holocaust denial is not anymore a topic for the far right. I mean, of course, the lunatic fringe, as we call them, right, still longing for the Holocaust denial, but most part of the far right stopped the Holocaust denial right at that point, or maybe a little bit before. And the narratives they used until after that really shifted towards more of, denying perpetrator roles, trivializing the crimes, or maybe trying to trivialize them by comparison, right? There's this famous frame from the Bomben Holocaust, so trying to give a sort of false balance between the bombing of, for example, Dresden and the Holocaust, so the Bomben Holocaust, right? So these are rhetoric strategies we've seen over years and years. And of course, the AfD tries to frame themselves as a conservative party, as a party everyone can vote for. So they really try to avoid these hard trivializations of the Holocaust, right? Because they know it's a hot topic in Germany. But still, over the last years, we see more and more attempts to really get this topic more on the map, but they're using coded language, right? They're talking about the cult of guilt, Schuldkult in German, right? So the commemoration of National Socialism and the atrocities and the crimes is too much. It's keeping the German nation down and the German people down, and it also restricts German politics, right? That's the whole topic. So we don't have to forget about that. The attack on the memory is an attack on the present, right? Because when you distort the past, you can make more space for politics nowadays. So it's really about distorting the past to make policies which are historically, of course, banned, right? Because of historical reasons, to make them maybe even more thinkable or even doable in the present time, right? I'm not saying that the AfD is planning like a new war or a new Holocaust or something like that. But of course, you really have to try to distort the past to make policies which are historically banned a thinkable option for today's society.
So clearly there's an attempt by Björn Höcke to completely shift the narrative and also the understanding of Germans, re-establish pride, as he calls it himself. He says that he claims that he's come to rescue Germans from themselves. So he keeps detecting, that was also in these podcasts he just did, a self-hatred amongst Germans, and that's something he wants to counter. At the same time, the timing is very crucial. We are weeks ahead of a party conference of the far-right Alternative for Germany, which will happen in his home state of Thuringia in Erfurt. Björn Höcke will most likely see one of his closest allies be elected into the leadership of the Alternative for Germany overall, and he himself has said that then he can feel confident that he has a direct line into the party leadership of the Alternative for Germany. So clearly he's intent on steering the course of the AfD, which over more than a decade always, when having to take a decision, took that turn to the right. So what do you make of the timing of this, Melanie?
I'm not sure if it was a conscious decision to address this topic right now in this way, or if it was at the end of a long podcast, so maybe he just kind of blurted it out. But maybe we can give him credit and say maybe he just kind of said it without a deeper strategic thinking, but that doesn't make it any better, because it shows that this topic is such a big presence in his subconscious that you can expect a statement like this at any moment without inner censorship. He just blurts out his true ideology and he shows his true colors. He's not making a secret of this anymore. It was already pointed out that he most likely, very likely, wrote for right-wing extremists pamphlets when he was a teacher. He wrote them under a false name to escape sanctions, being a member of public service. But now he doesn't need this kind of disguise anymore. And he openly says these things, and he feels safe saying them in his party. So the timing is also interesting because the party conference is coming up and he obviously doesn't see any disadvantage saying it. Maybe he even strategically said it to use it as his advantage, to send a signal to the extremist part of the party. I can say this, like it's a demonstration of power. But I'm sure he at least doesn't fear any kind of sanctions, and rightly so, because he has a huge power base within the party. The party leaders don't dare even try to get rid of him anymore. And if you talk to AfD people these days and confront them with this statement, it's more like a shrug, This is what Höcke has always said. We know him. Come on, it's just Höcke. The state of Thuringia is very small, and he's
like that weird uncle at the table who always comes out with statements that are not AfD party policy, because this is actually, in fact, I think it's interesting that Alice Weidel has stopped reacting to Björn Höcke. Mm-hmm. There is no official reaction. I reached out to her team once again just to make sure I didn't miss anything. I didn't get anything back in time for the recording of this podcast. So she didn't react to that, but she did react to a different statement where he was talking about East and West. But we'll get to that in a moment. But before, I would just like us to listen to how confident the AfD is right now in Germany that it will soon be in power. It was quite telling when when there was the statement in Parliament by Friedrich Merz on the summits that were coming up, the G7 and the EU summit that are taking place this week. The opposition, the largest opposition, always has the first right of response. And she used that to say this. And I think this is important to know, that this is against the backdrop of the AfD now nationwide polling ahead of Friedrich Merz's conservative CDU-CSU bloc.
You have two options, Mr. Merz. You can break the deadlock by ending the left-wing coalition with the SPD and seeking new constructive majorities. Or you can continue to wait and do nothing, which is to be expected, until the citizens force new elections for an AfD reform government, first in the states and then at the federal level.
So a very confident AfD. Melanie, is that her just being arrogant, or how much reason does she have to be that?
Well, on a state level, she has good reason to be arrogant and sure of her victory.
This is at least Weidel, the co-leader of the AfD. Yeah.
Yes, and Weidel, I mean, everybody knows the polls, but from my experience, AfD has often done better in the polls than in the actual election. But on a state level in East Germany, you can be quite sure that the polls correctly mirror the reality and how people are going to vote. And we might see an absolute majority for the AfD in 2 states of Germany. And in that case, they don't need the CDU to implement lots of decisions, for example, in the educational sector. And I think on a federal level, she's still maybe biting off more than she can chew. It's AfD is still far away from like ruling alone at all, or making it impossible to form a majority against her. I think this is still, but it's already on the horizon, this scenario. It's not totally out of the question that we will live to see the scenario in not so many years. So
yeah, a lot, of course, hinges on those elections in Saxony-Anhalt, which are the first elections where there's an expectation that they might not gain the absolute majority in votes, but in seats in parliament because of the election system. So that's also interesting that these comments are all coming in view of that.
Right.
And so Alice Weidel didn't react to this Holocaust responsibility comment, but she did react to something else that Björn Höcke said. He himself, coming from West Germany, having moved to Thuringia, he had this to say.
So in the West, in the western part of the Republic, there are German-speaking Americans, or rather, German-speaking Americans live there. And in the eastern part of the Republic, German-speaking Germans live. And I think this is a major and important factor that must be addressed if one wants to explain the polarization of German society and also this East-West dichotomy. In the East, people are still German. In the West, over the course of decades, they've found a substitute identity and have allowed themselves to be completely taken over by American culture.
Jakob, I want to take this to you. You do your research in Thuringia, in Jena. How does this resonate with people in the East?
Well, first of all, we've seen attempts to really play the East German identity card from the AfD in Thuringia since 2019 at least. Back then they used the slogan "Fulfill the transformation," so vollende die Wende. So they really tried to put themselves into the shoes of the GDR opposition, right? Nowadays, since maybe 2 or 3 years, we see sort of that they're trying to play both sides, right? On the one hand, they try to reframe the GDR as a sort of social and secure and in a sort of also ethnic homogeneous country, right? So they try to really portray this GDR as a nostalgic place people long for. On the other hand, they try to frame themselves as sort of the heirs of the opposition of the GDR, right? And they try to put all the negative aspects of the GDR, like the lack of freedom of speech, also repression, and of course a lack of democratic pluralism. They try to take all these negative values of the GDR and try to project them on the liberal democracy nowadays, right? So they're playing sort of a double game, if you will. And what does that for them? they're getting voters from both sides, right? So they get people who are nostalgic about the GDR, and they're also getting the people to the ballot who are opposed to GDR and maybe are in a fundamental opposition to liberal democracy. So they're actually contradicting themselves, but they're playing both sides, and they're getting victors from both both groups, right? So that's really a strategy which really works, sadly, right? And especially this East German identity thing is huge for the AfD, right? There's since a few years this attempt to reclaim the Simson. So it's a small motorbike produced in the late GDR by the millions. And nowadays it's still a symbol of, movement and freedom and mobility really in East Germany, especially for young people, because they can drive them when they're 16 years old. And the AfD is really trying to leverage that and really incorporating this whole Simson cult into their campaigns, actually. Björn Höcke himself did a motorbike tour on a Simson with youths from East Germany in Greiz, so it's a huge deal for them. And the other parties clearly have, they don't have an answer to this whole East German identity politics the AfD is pushing right now.
But if I may say, Jakob, I totally agree with you that this strategy works very well for East Germany. Mm-hmm. But I think on a national level, this statement was a mistake. It does tap into the very strong anti-American sentiment in parts of the AfD, but it's still, I think many AfD fans or members or politicians see it as an insult because they believe they're real Germans, obviously, and they feel they're being reduced to like American slaves or like American puppets, maybe. And I think that part was a strategic mistake, and this is why the party leadership has distanced itself from it, or probably at least this is the statement you hinted at earlier. And I think it's a bit sad to see that this is the kind of statement they would rebuff. But the Holocaust statement, or the statement that the real Germans didn't really have anything to do with it, is not something that will cause any kind of backlash.
Yeah, this was all in the space of 10 days. This was less than 10 days. And I also was going to ask you about it because clearly Alice Weidel, the co-leader, got a bit cold feet when she heard that particular comment. The AfD has been able to almost double what it got in regional elections in the West as well. We just saw that in Baden-Württemberg, in Rhineland-Palatinate, huge gains. So clearly she got nervous about this and pointed out to Björn Höcke. And again, she doesn't criticize him openly, but she pointed out that he's a Wessi himself, that he is from the West. And actually there was one voice, but he's more, he comes more conservative leaning, Rüdiger Lukassen, who spoke of SED speech. SED is the former party, the Communist Party that ran East Germany. So I thought that was remarkable. That seems like a very West German comment, seeing him as a complete Aussie.
Well, well,
ideological communism Aussie. Yeah.
You have to be aware that, I mean, without getting too far into the underbelly of the AfD, but Rüdiger Lukassen, who you just quoted, is a former army member, very highly decorated, and he believes in NATO. He believes in the Western Alliance, and he's kind of an opponent within the party to Höcke. So Höcke is more represents the people who seek a close alliance with Russia, who, like I said, encourage the anti-American sentiment or try to play with this or encourage people to have like anti-American positions. So that these two people clash is kind of normal because they're rivals within the party. But I found it interesting that even Alice Weidel would go that far to indirectly criticize him. It is a risk for her.
Yes.
He has so much power within the party that to speak out against him, and even be it without like directly attacking him, is already a gamble.
And she clearly has hopes. We expect the co-leadership to be re-elected now, but she hopes to become the sole leader of the AfD the next time around. So she doesn't want to risk that process, clearly. Yes. But I think it's really interesting that we now spoke about Rüdiger Lukassen, because he's also seen by many conservatives from the CDU-CSU bloc as someone who one can talk to, one can reason with. And that brings us to Saxony-Anhalt. Also within the space of these 10 days, we saw a video pop up
Yes.
Where the AfD's top candidate in Saxony-Anhalt, who is widely expected to potentially become the first AfD state premier if the polls currently translate into actual voting results, was seen joking and being per du, like, very amicably, with the CDU, the Conservative CDU party's chief whip, the parliamentary group leader in Saxony-Anhalt. Interpret that scene for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very interesting to see how chummy they looked together on this podium. And officially, the CDU position, which was also dictated by Friedrich Merz, the main party leader, but which is also an official resolution that the whole party took at a conference, seeks no cooperation whatsoever with the AfD. So Friedrich Merz has repeatedly called them extremists, has warned about the danger they pose to Germany, to the German economy, to the German democracy. And so this behavior, just the look of it, was a total contradiction of everything Merz has imposed on the party has imposed on itself. So we caught a glimpse of what might happen after the election, because I believe that parts of the CDU are secretly hoping that maybe AfD will get the absolute majority and they will not have to be confronted with the question, do we cooperate with them?
Is the firewall going to get cracks? Is this going to be the first big hole in that
firewall? Is it a hole in the firewall if we just tolerate them or occasionally vote with them, because otherwise the state might not be functioning? Like, if you cannot find a majority to create a budget for the state, if you cannot pay your state employees, if you cannot build roads, like, this is obviously a situation, like a state has to be managed somehow politically. So, like, what kind of how far can we go in our responsibility to keep Sachsen-Anhalt as a functioning state, but without destroying the illusion that we're not really cooperating with the AfD? So this is a topic which is very, very delicate. And just to see the images of these two politicians, this is, for the German public, I think this was a signal that was, well, either concerning depending on how you look at it. I think there are parts of German society who say, why don't we give AfD a chance? Mm-hmm. Let them prove themselves. And is it really that horrible what they're demanding? Is it really that bad? And so what they say that the Holocaust was not the German people's fault. It was 80 years ago. It's like, what does the state of Saxony-Anhalt have to do with Gaza or whatever, our responsibility towards Israel? Let's focus on creating good schools let's make it a lab, a laboratory for the political future, and let's just give them a chance. And if they fail, we will never elect them again. So they see, like, having extremists in government is, I think, not such a scary vision for a part of the German society. We have to acknowledge that as a fact.
That's what the polling also shows. I think it's also important to note that they are the largest opposition in Germany. They are part of the political spectrum, completely legal, but more and more states, and these past days we just saw the Bavarian court ruling that the Bavarian section of the Alternative for Germany can now also be investigated by domestic intelligence, because there are concerns that they, as a grouping, want to undermine the democratic system itself. Coming back to Saxony-Anhalt, because you mentioned schooling, the program there of the AfD is also very specific in wanting to teach a different take on history. Mm-hmm. And
embrace the positive aspects of German history and not always dwell for too long on the dark side.
And educate children and I don't have the exact wording right now, but in a spirit of being positive about their own country. Mm. That's kind of the broad sense that is in that party political program, which was
makes
very
it
remarkable.
So harmless, which makes it sound so harmless, doesn't it?
So there's no direct connection between the comments of Björn Höcke and the history books in Saxony-Anhalt, but that is the power base of the AfD. And that, of course, is remarkable. But that brings us back to the timing. We expect those elections to be a defining moment also for Friedrich Merz's conservatives, because any crack or hole in the firewall has the potential to tear the conservative CDU-CSU apart. And Jakob, I just want to bring you back in on that. When you look at all the different aspects we just discussed right now, how far away are we from actually from German history books being rewritten, or at least the public discourse successfully changed here in Germany?
Well, I think it changed over the last years tremendously, right? Our project leader, Jens Christian Wagner, always talks about the climate change in commemoration culture, right? Especially when we look to Saxonia-Anhalt, we just talked about it. I mean, they've got like the slogan, less Hitler, more Bismarck. And that really shows where the path is going down, right? And also, if you look at the program for Saxonia-Anhalt, they're talking about that the German remembrance culture is national masochism or a cult of guilt. All these terms come up. So, I mean, they don't have to pronounce it until the last drop, but we know where the path is heading. And if it comes to an AfD coalition or maybe a majority of the AfD for itself in Saxonia-Anhalt, I think cultural politics and education is the first things they're going to tackle. Because one of the most influential persons in the AfD Saxonia-Anhalt is Hans-Thomas Tilschneider, and he is obsessed with German history and German culture. So I think that is, of course, the first topic they are going to tackle.
And I'm really grateful that we were able to look at all these different layers of this and what it means in real terms. And I just want to conclude, Melanie, what do you see as the potential avenue for the parties of the centre out of this, and why is it unlikely to be an attempt to ban the far-right alternative for Germany?
Well, I mean, the German legal system has this unique tool to protect the democratic system against extremist parties that seek to destroy it. This is what we learned from the Weimar Republic, that sometimes you can use democratic measures to destroy democracy, basically. So this is a preventative tool, so to say, but of course it's a very harsh attack on the party system, because you can and
it's also very risky. It's failed before.
A powerful instrument which has failed before, right? And which would eliminate, like you said, the biggest opposition party in Germany if successful. So also from a democratic standpoint, isn't it problematic to take away the political party that obviously a lot of Germans set their hopes into and have voted for? So I think politicians are scared of the criticism that they try to get rid of a political opponent that they cannot deal with political measures. So they use the legal system to destroy an opposition they don't like. And so this is why they're holding back, and nobody wants to be the one maybe failing in the constitutional court to get AfD abolished. And this is why nobody dares use this tool. I believe, there are many legal scholars who say, why don't we start with the prohibition of maybe just parts of the AfD? Because, for example, the
youth organization got close to it and then
exactly, and the branch that Björn Höcke is running has been deemed anti-constitutional for years, and they never tried to legally attack it. And so why not start with this part of the party? And because you have the proof, you have the documents, and there's no election on the horizon, you could safely do it now. But I think there's a hesitation, and there's just the fear to be seen as somebody who, like in a football game, instead of winning against the other team, you try to, slash their tires so they don't even get to the game. So, and that it's an illegitimate measure. And so politicians are worried to be themselves being branded anti-democratic by doing this.
Yeah, so clearly the political debate here is stuck on that. And just to wrap it up with you, Jakob, as a social scientist, I would like to get your sense of what is your prediction of what we will see happen in terms of narratives shifting, or do you see any chance of a correction through public debate over the coming years?
Well, my impression is that educators and politicians and commemoration sites really are aware of the topic of historical distortion and denialism and historical revisionism, and they're really trying to tackle it. On the other hand, we are dealing with a certain amount of people from maybe, especially the AfD voters, who oppose any science-based argument, right? So you can't make a point anymore to them. So the question for me is actually, how do we reach these people, right? Because that is, I think, the most important question we have to answer right now. How do we get people back to democratic values and to science-based communication? Because right now we are stuck in a position where, for example, in Thuringia, 33% of the people voted in the state election for the AfD. How do we get these people back? How do we get them back on a sort of democratic track, at least, right? And when it comes to shifting narratives, I think the narratives have been shifted way too much over the last years, and I think it would be wise to really tackle historical revisionism and distortion in a more offensive way and actually go there where it's reproduced, and that's mainly social media nowadays, right? We're trying still to tackle historical distortion and revisionism like in the 20th century, but we're in the 21st century now. And if you look at TikTok, if you look at Instagram, it's full of content of historical distortion, of revisionist propaganda, and we really need to start tackle it where it comes from. So that's right now.
Thank you very much, Jakob. And I just want to add that in the state of Thuringia, the AfD is also being observed by domestic intelligence because it is as a whole there seen as potentially countering the democratic system itself. But with your suggestion to take this into digital media, I think we just established at least 3 other episodes of Berlin Briefing here. So Jakob, I thank you very much for your expertise. Melanie, thank you so much for your political analysis. With that, you're fully briefed up for now on the state of affairs concerning the AfD and a leading figure trying to shift the narrative on the responsibility for the Holocaust, which is a consensus here in Germany, except, of course, for those voices from the AfD, from the far right wing of that. I would love you to sign up to our weekly newsletter, Berlin Briefing, if you haven't done so already. There's a lot more analysis on the issues of the week, a deep dive into German politics. And of course, don't forget to drop us a line on questions you may have where you would like to take us a deeper dive. With that, thank you very much for watching and listening wherever you are.